Morning. Hi there, I'm Mark Silverman from Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to the session Power of Legacy, Planned Giving Role in Mobilizing Crisis Response and Securing the Future. Thank you for joining us today. Recordings of this session and all other workshops will be available online after the GA ends. I hope you are planning to join us at 1:30 for the Jewish Together plenary, which happens to be chaired by one of our speakers this morning, Julie Platt. Every year, all of our communities benefit from the foresight of donors who created legacy gifts. Contributions from their endowments provide funding that fuels our annual campaigns and helps keep our Jewish communities vibrant and strong. But let's be honest, historically, planned giving has been treated as a secondary priority. Today's workshop is going to tell the story of how legacy giving made the Federation system response to COVID possible to engage our donors in conversations about permanent gifts. Towards that end, we have an exciting new tool in our toolbox, the Jewish Future Pledge, and we are going to hear about that from its founders and lay leadership. I'm pleased to welcome our moderator, David Brown, JFNA's National Campaign Chair, and our esteemed speakers for the first part of the workshop. Mike Levin, co-founder of the Jewish Future Pledge, myself, board chair of the Jewish Future Pledge, Julie Platt, secretary of JFNA board and advisory board member for the Jewish Future Pledge, and Elisa Palter, Fisher Flight alum. David, take it away.
Mark, thank you very much. And it's great to be with everybody this morning. I just want to note at the outset that while we do have the Zoom webinar chat, we're only going to be using it for purposes of putting in questions. So if you do have questions, we're going to be monitoring it. We look forward to hearing from each one of you if you have questions along the way. So Mark, thanks for the introduction. It's great to be with everybody. And we're going to kick this off. And Mike, as the founder of the Jewish Futures Pledge, tell us the story, how this came about and why we're sitting here today in collaboration with the Jewish Federations of North America.
Well, thank you for the question, David, and thank you for allowing me to appear here amongst all these people about the Jewish Future Pledge. In the summer of 2017, I was in Aspen, Colorado, attending a lecture by David Horowitz at the Community Center. David Horowitz, the editor of the Times of Israel. At that time, David Horowitz mentioned in his speech that he was very worried about the future of the Jewish people, the state of Israel, in terms of their financial viability. What he said was that $68 trillion was going to be passed on just in North America to the next generation. He estimated that $6.3 trillion would be given to charity. We then estimated that 20% of that charity could be given by Jewish donors. I'd never thought about it. So after the 2017, it sat in the back of my head, back of my mind until 2018 when I met Mark Silverman in Aspen. And we talked about the future giving to the Jewish Federation in Atlanta. Afterwards, we did a donor advised fund. I went to my wife and said, I'm giving three donor advised funds, one to each one of my sons. And she said to me very simply, how do you know they're going to spend the money Jewishly? And I said, I don't know. And after that, we came up with the idea of a Jewish Future Pledge, that charitable dollars left to the next generation, that 50% or more be used for Jewish causes and the state of Israel. That's how it all started. And we've been working on it now for about 19 months. We're up to a significant amount of signatures of all types, all incomes, and that's how we're going. We have a website, we have a video, we have everything going for us now, and it's called the jewishfuturepledge.org, and it's going to be able to sustain the Jewish community with billions of dollars that are available to us if we only get half of what's left.
Mike, thanks for telling that story and thanks for your tenacity and leadership and your vision. And for us all to be here together is pretty remarkable. So Mike, obviously you needed to have other people involved with it and it wasn't just going to be a one-man show. Mark, how did you get involved?
Well, I was very excited about working with Mike on this. At the time we were discussing it, I was the board chair of the Atlanta Federation, and Atlanta is sort of a a far-sighted, incubating, innovative city, and I thought this would be something that would really be new and exciting to sort of incubate in Atlanta. And one of the things in my discussions with Mike is we were sort of talking out loud in the last 20 years, like we went back and forth real quickly. Could we make really great things that had gotten started just this way? And so if you think about it in the Jewish world, like, PJ got started 20 years ago, PJ Library, Birthright, One Happy Camper from the Foundation for Jewish Camp got started 20 years ago. Moshe House more recently, One Table, and other really great organizations that have revamped Jewish life have gotten started here. But who's really addressing what the Jewish future is going to be like? And so I thought this idea was sort of a genius idea that we could ensure that there would be money available to continue not only in the legacy institutions that we're currently supporting now, but all the new and exciting institutions that are going to come forward in the next 10 or 20 years. So we thought Atlanta would be a great place to incubate.
So thank you for the leadership and the incubation, and you and Mike now have become really a terrific team. But to build this out, you needed additional stakeholders and others to get involved with you. And Julie, how did you get introduced to the Jewish Futures Pledge, and what has it meant for you and your family?
I was introduced to it by these two esteemed gentlemen who both told me about the idea, and it took me about 30 seconds to say yes. It feels like an extension of everything I am and everything I do, an opportunity not to just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And if you spend your life trying to ensure a Jewish future, this is just an extension of that for me. It did give me an opportunity to have a conversation with my children, but not one that was surprising to them, because this is who I am 24/7. So we did speak about what this would mean in terms of the legacy that I am hoping to impart to them. We then began a family foundation to begin to give them the opportunity to practice what it's like to begin to make these kinds of decisions, keeping in mind the Jewish Future Pledge. It's a transparent, easy way to teach your children while you are still here. I remember about 20 years ago when I was a Wexner student, they asked us to write a living will and to try to impart to our children who we are and what it means to us to be Jewish. This is an extension again of that. It's an opportunity for me to tell my children who I am and who I hope I will continue to be to them and to the Jewish people.
And Julie, thank you for sharing that. And one of your other hats that you wear is the board chair of the Foundation for Jewish Camping. So how do you think the Foundation for Jewish Camping can use this as a tool as you're thinking this through?
Oh, we already have begun that. As Mark will attest to, I brought this to the board of the Foundation for Jewish Camp and have begun to encourage them one by one to sign the Jewish Future Pledge. Again, anybody who is engaged in Jewish life in a way that would bring them to the board of JFNA, to leadership in their community, to being on this webinar, already cares deeply about the Jewish future. And boy, just so do the people on the board of the Foundation for Jewish Camp. So Mark and I, one by one, will ensure that our board members sign the pledge.
Julie, thank you for sharing that. And Elise, I'm going to turn to you right now. So you hail from Toronto and have been an active community member and leader for years. How did you first get introduced to the Jewish Giving Pledge, and what has it meant for you and your family?
So like Julie, I was a Wexner Fellow and also already had written the ethical will, and it was part of our family discussion for a long time. We also were Fisher Flight members, my husband Gil and I. And so part of the learnings of the Fisher Flight was all about what you want to do and how you want to make a difference and hopefully making your difference in the Jewish world. So my husband and I had already set up a foundation. We have already been very involved. He's been campaign chair. I brought in your PJ Library to Toronto. So a whole bunch of things that we've been involved with and continue to be involved with in the Jewish world. So none of this was new to us. We happened to be invited to a call a couple weeks ago for Fisher Flight members, alum and members, and were told about it by Jane Sherman and Kim Fish, and it, as Julie said, it's a no-brainer. We were already, our wills already talk about doing this. We already had the ethical will and had the discussion with our children. So for us, we wanted to become the first, I think we're the first Canadian signatories of the pledge, because it was very important to us to set an example, as we have tried to do in our lives. So we're just using the pledge as a way to start talking about it to other people. It was very important to be able to open conversations. So that's why we signed.
Elisa, thank you. So I want to turn it to more of a personal basis. And Mike, how has this changed your life? Because you've been an active business person, involved with the Marcus Foundation, but this is a true passion for you. But how has it personally changed your life and maybe those in your family?
Well, I think the first thing I had to do was meet with my children. And I don't want to underemphasize, I want to overemphasize the fact that this is a next generation situation. We always get the question, what's the difference between this and legacy? Legacy is when I would give a gift that's a legacy gift out of my will or in cash or whatever I'm doing. This is a conversation with the next generation to attempt to convince them to do it themselves after what we're doing with whatever charitable resources we're leaving to them to use when we are gone. So it does involve the generation. You can see on the video that we have, all three of my sons are on the video, committed to the particular situation. I'm sure it's with Julie and Elisa are also the same thing. So my real concern on this, David, was the next generation. And I think that's the biggest risk we have to this money. I'm not worried about the people on this screen or the people or the 200 and 310 participants. I'm looking at the screen now that are listening. They're already committed. But this gives a strategy for them to use with their children, with their grandchildren. And so I'm very passionate about it. And you know, it's just been a mission for me to finish. I'm going to be 83 in a couple of weeks, and this is my last gift to the Jewish world.
And David, I just want to add something to what Mike is saying, and I know Elisa mentioned this also. It's not just a conversation to have with my children, and you know, my grandchildren are too young for me to discuss this with them yet, but it is a way for me to have this conversation with my peers as well. That is a really wonderful conversation to be able to have. It's not like it's the first conversation I've ever had with my peers about what matters Jewishly in our community. But this is a way for you to set an example for your peers as well and have those same conversations that you've been having with them all along about what matters to you.
Julie, really important point. And so it's not only the impact down the road and from Lador Vador, as Michael's been describing, but really the reality of the impact we can have today, and to ensure that things are set up and that you're having these meaningful conversations. Mark, as you've been helping lead this from Atlanta and then branching this out, how has this impacted you and your family? What has it meant to you?
Well, to be honest, my wife and I certainly consider ourselves, philanthropists, and been, giving money away to the Jewish world for a while now. And it wasn't until sort of the bell went off in our head about the Jewish Future Pledge that maybe we should incorporate our children. So we're actually having, it's going to be this week, because of COVID, it was delayed. We're going to have our first family philanthropy meeting of where we're going to sort of go in more in depth about the why and the wherefore of the Jewish Future Pledge. We've written a sort of a legacy letter to the children we intend to read to them. our grandchildren are also just sort of on the fringe, a little young to get started in this yet. And so it's been very meaningful for my wife and I to engage the four children, plus their spouses. And in my family, I have three of my children that are already married to somebody who is not of the Jewish faith in the household. So even this Jewish future pledge at 50% is even more important to bring the entire family to the table to understand about how we need to invest in the next generation.
Mark, thank you on that. Elisa, from your community leadership point of view, do you think this is going to be an easy sell for your peers? And then back to sort of the opportunity to have further discussions with your family members. How will you use this Jewish Futures Pledge in both of those conversations?
I already have used this Jewish Futures Pledge, so thank you, Mike. In fact, I went for a walk with a friend on the weekend and I told her all about it. So somehow it's just such an easy way to open a conversation. What are you doing these days? Well, you know what? I just signed this pledge. It's a really easy way to talk about it and to open a conversation with friends and peers. And I actually think that anybody I've told about it has been so surprised that it hasn't existed before, to be honest. It seems like such a no-brainer. And, you know, Mike, kudos to you for realizing that this was something that just needed to happen, and that it can happen for anybody, no matter what your income level is, what you're thinking about putting in your will. If it's, $2,000, 1,000 of it can go to Jewish causes. It doesn't have to be $1 million. It doesn't have to be $1 billion. So the thing that makes it so exciting to me is that it's accessible to everybody. It's not just like the Billionaires Pledge, which I know people say, oh, is it like that? It's not like that, because it's really for everybody. That's what makes it so easy to roll out to a community, to peers, to friends, to talk to our kids and our kids' friends, because everybody can sign it. And even your youth pledge that you've put on there doesn't even have money involved in it. So to me, that makes it so exciting, is that it's a conversation that you can open up literally with anybody. So I plan to have more with our children. We talk about this stuff all the time. It's a pretty typical topic at our dinner table. And also with our closest friends, it does come up because most of our closest friends are very involved in the Jewish community. So, you start with there, and you just kind of, the commercial, they tell two friends and they tell two friends and they tell two friends. I think that it's not going to be a hard sell anywhere in the world.
So Elisa, you bring up a really important point, and Mike, back to the teenagers and working with certain youth groups and why that is important. And then Mark, I'll get to you in a moment, but why don't you just briefly talk about that? Because Lisa, that's a really good point.
Okay, well, I didn't know Lisa was going to bring that up, but because we just started, we have what we call a brand extension. It's called the Jewish Youth Pledge. Last week, I was on a call with 12 members, 12 teenagers from NCSY. All of them signed and held up a sign. We've signed the Jewish Youth Pledge, which is a commitment to the Jewish people and the state of Israel, and part of their next generation to give their commitment. And we're working with BBYO, we're working with NCSY, we intend to work with NIFTY and the conservative movement and all the rest. But I also sent it to my camp, Camp Tevye in Brookline, New Hampshire, where I spent 10 years of my life, and the Cohen camps. And they said it was a great idea for their seniors when they graduate from the camp to sign the pledge of the commitment. So I thought we could start from the bottom up as well as from the top down. Get the entire Jewish community, working with the Pi fraternity as well. And there's not a money tied up there, it's just a commitment. This is not a legal document, it's a moral commitment, because without us in the next generation, and I get the question all the time about what's the difference between this and legacy? It isn't really different. It's really kind of the same thing, making the general commitment. It doesn't prevent legacy gifts. In fact, it enhances it. It also enhances the Jewish organizations for survival, because it gives them people who have already leading their children and leading themselves to continue their support. How many Julie Platts and Elisa Paltas, Mark Silvermans, Mike Levins are there going to be? And so we need them all. We really need them all.
Mike, thank you. Mark, you wanted to jump in.
Of questions in the chat box about life and legacy, and so yes, the Jewish Future Pledge is totally integrated into life and legacy. I could give is, so I have some legacy gifts that are going to come out of my estate. Additional cash.
Mark's internet is low.
Mark, you're a little frozen. So maybe reboot for a second. I'm gonna turn it, Mike. The idea that this we're here at a Jewish Federations of North America General Assembly as one of the workshops leading into the GA plenary this afternoon. How did this come about with the partnership of the Jewish Federations of North America, and why, from the Jewish Futures Pledge, why is this partnership so important?
Well, I think we have to get a distribution system, and the best distribution system in the Jewish world is JF&A, and particularly in North America. I just want to emphasize, I didn't even know this, but when David Horowitz spoke, he said 90% of the diaspora is in the United States and Canada, or North America. 90%. Think about that. And that's where most of these dollars are. So, and who has the best lead into the most amount of Jewish people who are committed is JF&A. So now we're opening up and going to test 10 more federations to follow the Atlanta lead that Mark helped with, the Dallas lead that Mark helped with, the Miami lead that Amy Holtz, who's my co-founder, helped with, and 10 more federations that we're going to test and see whether their foundations and what have you can commit signatures and get the thing going. So I think we feel the federation needs to think about, and we know they do. They think about the next generation also, as many of the Jewish programs are in next generation. But now we have to get our own generation to be able to teach that process.
So Mike, you raised just the real power of the federation system, the power of the collective, the power of 146 federation communities together with 300 communities that are part of the network system, and that distribution and that opportunity to engage and to help educate and ultimately to make them a part of this. And the next session that Dirk Bird and others are going to be leading is the importance during this latest pandemic and the needs in the community, how the legacy giving and the donor advised funds really made a difference. And so you're leading right now with trying to make certain those dollars are available. They're going to be talking how important it was just during this recent crisis. Mark, I'm going to turn it back to you, and hopefully you're unfrozen for a second.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. I just wanted to address this issue in the chat box about life and legacy and its integration in the Jewish Future Pledge. And I give a personal example. As my wife and I, as part of our estate planning, have some gifts named to some Jewish institutions, but I'm also going to have some other assets that are going to go into a donor advised fund, and we would also be working with the next generation at that particular time to continue on and honor our request for the Jewish Future Pledge. Now, in theory, if I gave 50% of all my charitable assets as a legacy gift, then in theory, technically, my obligation is made, but I also want to develop philanthropy for my children and my grandchildren to continue to live on. So you can see it all works together. It's a great conversational piece. If somebody is opening up a donor advised fund today, the first thing that should be asked is they should be talking about the Jewish Future Pledge. And then they also could obviously engage that donor in discussions about legacy gifts that they may or may not be thinking about that could be made out of their donor advised fund at their death, et cetera. So it's a really broad-based, integrated conversation for sure.
So Mark, thank you for sharing that. Mike, you want to just jump in with a point?
Yeah, I just want to mention that, there's somewhere north of $20 billion in donor advised funds at Jewish federations across North America today. That does not even come close to the amount of billions of dollars that Jewish people have in donor advised funds in a number of financial institutions. We have not yet found anybody in the 17, 18 months we've been working that has any kind of letter, any kind of statement with their donor advised fund that says if something happens to them, what is the direction for the money that's going to be left to their heirs? So we've been working with language so that they can once again direct the money if something does happen and it'll no longer here. So that's another big opportunity for the foundations in the Federation, even to direct those things to the federations themselves, or a portion of that 50% or more to the Federation itself. So there are what I call marketing and selling opportunities for the organizations like Jewish Camping, like Birthright, like the Federation, to use this particular vehicle as a sales tool and also protect the future for all of us.
So Mike, one of the aspects of the Jewish Futures Pledge is to giving to the Jewish community, and many people think about that locally. But one of the strong aspects of it was also the support of the State of Israel. And Elisa, how have you thought about that from a point of view of your philanthropic initiatives and your family and your support of the State of Israel and different institutions there?
So our main support of an institution in Israel is that my husband and I, actually our whole family, are founders of Israel's only liberal arts college called Shalem College in Jerusalem, whose goal is to create the next set of leaders for Israel, whether it's in politics or law or journalism or whatever. And so our donor advised fund, part of what we have put into our wills and into our instructions that go with it and into our ethical will that accompanies all of our documents is that we want to continue to support this institution and any other ones that we are supporting. So I think it's part of what this is all about is just making clear what your wishes are. If you've lived your whole life in a particular way, and then money goes to the next generation and they say, yeah, not so into Israel, not so into Judaism, not so into whatever, then all of that money that you've worked for and all of that time and energy and love that you've put into the Jewish community your whole life sort of goes for naught. And so for us, it's just very important to feel like, we've worked for all this money. My husband and I both have our own businesses, and it was very important to us. It's always been important to us that the money that we give goes to Jewish causes. And part of why we work so hard is so that we have more money to give to Jewish causes. And so to have the next generation not understand the importance of that to us seemed to us to be sort of a waste of all that work we've put in, all that love we've put in. And so this conversation, I think, helps with the continuation of the things that are important to us, the college in Israel, our local community, our federation, all of the organizations that we've been a part of. And I think that's the big thing is whatever is important to you in the Jewish world, make it clear to the next generation that is where you want your funds to go.
So Elisa, thank you for sharing that and the connection to the State of Israel. And so, back to sort of the investment that you and your family have made into the Jewish community and the State of Israel, how beyond just signing the pledge, Mike, do you see the role of the Jewish Futures Pledge on the engagement and education of the next gen and the engagement and education of the broader community? Because just signing the pledge is great, but there's obviously more work to be done. So how do you see that rolling out, and the role of the Jewish Futures Pledge and engagement with Fisher Flight as an example, as one aspect that we're going to be working with the Jewish Federation North America, together with these 10 pilot communities? But what more is the Jewish Futures Pledge going to be doing relating to that education and engagement?
Well, I think what Mark said in the very beginning, and I think what Julie and Elisa said really answer that question. I believe that the Jewish Future Pledge and it manifests itself in a teaching model by itself. For those of your peers, as Julie said, for those of your children, as Lisa said, and I think it is absolutely as people have said, a no-brainer to say that if you're Jewish and you're committed, that you're going to sell this commitment to those people around you, and it's also a tool for the organizations themselves for their own survival financially as the future goes on. So I think for education, for what have you, it's really an insurance policy for the Jewish people. And I think it's like buying without spending the money, simply buying an insurance plan. And I think it's a very, very easy education to talk about it. We have a question up there. If I was single and there were no children, what do you do? And I mean, it gives an opportunity for people to talk about their legacies, to talk about what they're going to do. And I think I don't want to dominate this conversation, but I have a story going on that I'm working on now. A rabbi, my oldest friend, who's a retired rabbi, called me the other day and he said there's an 81-year-old widow of a major foundation that's very significant, who gives a significant amount of money to Jewish causes in Israel, as he defined them, progressive causes in Israel, such as Women in the Wall and things of that particular kind. And she's worried that her children, after her passing, will not spend the money supporting those causes. Now, here is he wants me to talk to her. It's a perfect example for her, as Elise said, to define, like the university she was talking at, to define the cause, to set aside the money and make sure that that's protected in the bylaws of that foundation. So there's a lot of education that people can do, either whether you're running an organization or you're dealing with your children who are going to follow you. So I think it's a real tool.
Great. So go ahead, Mark, and then Julie, just from a point of view as a senior officer of the Jewish Federations in North America, just from your perspective, wearing the other side of it, the importance of this for the Jewish Federations in North America and the federation system being part of the Jewish Giving Pledge. And then Mark, I'll turn it to you.
So I was just sitting here thinking, I'm very engaged in the national security campaign that JFNA is about to launch. And I care very deeply about the physical security of the system. This is like a partner importance to me. We have to ensure every part of the security of the Jewish future, both physically and in everything we are as a Jewish people. It just all makes sense. It makes sense that the Federation is going to secure the Jewish future in every way that security is defined. And I'm proud that JFNA is taking on both parts of this. The other thing, I just wanted to highlight something that Elisa said in one of her earlier parts, which is it doesn't matter the amount. I don't want anybody to feel that because they don't have some enormous donor advised fund or some enormous foundation, that this isn't equally important. Every dollar that goes into securing the Jewish future is important. So don't be daunted by that or feel that you are not part of this family. You are part of the family of securing the Jewish future.
Julie, thank you. Well said. Mark, you had a further thought or comment?
Yeah, just two quick follow-ups for what Mike was talking about. In Atlanta, we're in our second year, and we have two robust things being developed already out of the outcomes of the Jewish Future Pledge. And one is we've been running some next generation philanthropy programs. We were running them in person, obviously, before COVID, but after COVID, we're running them online with a group of people that identify from the community, the younger generation, that they're really interested in having a sort of a deeper input and result of learning about philanthropy in general. And so that's come out of sort of the signing of the Jewish Future Pledge. And then the last thing I'm particularly proud of is that we have been developing in the Atlanta Jewish Foundation a new donor advised fund called the Legacy Fund. And this is the fund that donors who are going to have money put into a donor advice fund will use, because this one will have all the rails and the discussions about how this money is supposed to be given away and the percentages and how it would be executed with the next generation. And so once this is finalized, we have no problem releasing it to the Federation system to be used in other Federation communities.
So Mark, and thank you for sharing that. And so from the Jewish Futures Pledge is also coming some new ways of looking at donor advised funds, creating some new vehicles to be able to ensure the Jewish Futures Pledge can be ultimately implemented. And so my question to you as we're sort of beginning the wrap up is, what is it that you want everybody who is on the call today to be thinking about? What is it that they can be doing? And Mike, I'll start with you.
Well, I think the most important thing for people on the call is to, number one, go to the website of Jewish Future Pledge, really understand the numbers, understand the situation, read the documents that people that have signed have said why they have signed, and educate yourself. The second thing is to think about how it applies to you directly in your personal situation, how you can relate it to children if you have them, to nephews or nieces if you have them, or grandchildren if you have them, and what you're doing with what's going to come after you, and look at that and see how it applies to your particular situation. To talk to your financial advisors, your accountants, your lawyers if you have them, if you're substantial or not substantial, and just think about the future as opposed to just today. This is a long run situation. We've been here for thousands of years. We want to make sure that we're here for thousands of years more, in spite of being the most difficult people in the world, as far as I can see by just reading the newspaper every day. So I think it's an opportunity for the people who are watching and who are participating. This is a nonpartisan activity. It has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do what you're feeling about the situation here or in Israel or anything. It has to do with the Jewish people, and it's financial and support survival for the future. So if you take that as your personal situation, talk to other people, tell people what you're doing, as Elisa has and Julie has and Mark have and I have. But the website will give you all you have to have in terms of knowledge, and then take it from there.
Mike, thank you. Thank you for that. And from a rollout point of view, we have a number of individuals who are interested for themselves, but we also have a number of professionals who are working in their communities, who care deeply about preserving, the current and future Jewish life in each of their communities and connecting to Israel. What advice, Julie, do you have for them as they're thinking and considering this, as far as trying to bring this to their community?
It gives you a very good vehicle to encourage people to have conversations with their families. This is a great excuse to have the opportunity to say what matters to your family. And it's almost permission that sometimes people are timid or not clear or walk on eggshells in expressing themselves to their family. Federations can give their leaders an excuse to have those conversations through the Jewish Future Pledge. And it's also, as we've all talked about, an extension of who we all are as members of this broader Jewish community. This just concretizes what we're all doing every day. All of us who are participating in JFNA's GA, this is just a natural extension of who we are in the Jewish community.
Julie, thank you. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the answer to the Jewish professional is sign the pledge, set the example. I mean, that's the simplest thing. It's a moral commitment. It's not going to be looking at net worth or whatever it is. Sign the pledge and say, I've signed the pledge, and put your name on the website and why you've signed it. I think this helps. This helps. We need to expand the situation. I think Elisa said it before, or Julie said it before, I can't remember. This is for all people. It doesn't make any difference whether you're very wealthy. It doesn't make any difference. Whatever it is, every dollar counts. It's if I were in my office in Florida, you'd see behind me 2 little boxes from the Jewish National Fund that I bought in an auction, because I remember when I was a child, that little box was picked up every Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock by an old man knocking on the apartment door filled with pennies from my grandparents. And that's what this is. The Jewish Future Pledge, that was taking care of the Jewish Future Pledge back in the 1940s. And so this is just a replacement. And so I think for the Jewish professional, it's a great opportunity to participate. We'd love to have every Jewish professional sign the pledge.
So Mike, you bring up a good point, and one of the things that we have been emphasizing through the national system is the concept of total FRD, and Dirk's going to get a little bit more into that into the next session, which is the importance and primacy of the annual campaign within our communities, but also the idea of the importance of supplemental giving, and we've seen very significant supplemental giving around COVID and COVID relief, but also the importance of legacy giving. Is that this is an opportunity, and I would suggest for each of the professionals or board chairs or CEOs who are listening to this call or see a tape of this, is to consider bringing this to your board meetings. And just like Julie is bringing it to the Foundation for Jewish Campaigning, I'm sure Mark has brought it to his community, the idea of having this discussion at your board meeting and the leadership will be very, very significant. And the reality is it would be really important for us to publish and say those communities that have signed up through their boards and have had an opportunity to bring it out from there. So just another thought or idea. We're going to wrap it up from here. Mark, did you as any final words from your perch as one of the leaders of the Jewish Giving Pledge?
Well, I'd just like to thank everybody for taking the time out of their busy schedule to listen in. My final quote of the day is 10 to 20 years from now, our children and grandchildren will thank us for getting involved with the Jewish Future Pledge to ensure the Jewish future.
Mark, thank you. And Elisa, any just final word?
I just would really like to thank Mike for putting this conversation onto all of our dinner tables and our walks and our conversations with all of our friends and families, because I think it's a really important one to have. And I think that he's given us a vehicle to start that conversation. So I just want to say, well done.
Elisa, thank you. Julie, any final word? And then we're going to let Michael wrap with the final word. Julie?
Only just to encourage everyone listening to not only join us in signing the Jewish Future Pledge, but to encourage their networks as well.
Great. Mike, final word before we wrap and turn it over to Dirk Bird and the next group of panelists.
Well, I think everybody said what has to be said. And thank you, Elisa and Julie, who've been great supporters. Mark, of course. I want to say that I think this is a strategy that we needed. The annual campaigns of all organizations, our annual campaigns, it's like the quarterly earnings in a public company. And but in the end, if you have a long run good business, and we have a long run good community, Jewish community, this is going to protect its future. I feel confident we'll get there. What I'd really like to see is every board and every Jewish organization professional sign the pledge. I'd like to see every child who's bar mitzvahed sign the pledge. I'd like to see every rabbi sign the pledge. I'd like to see everybody make this something that keeps our Jewish people unique and together through all the other things that go on in our lives. And we have one thing in common. We all care about the survival of the Jewish people, and we have to make that happen.
Mike, thank you for your vision, for your leadership, for your passion. I will tell you that after our program today, I am going to go online and sign the Jewish Future Pledge. So I am now joining your team. Happy to be a part of it. I'm happy to have the Jewish Future Pledge collaborate with and partner with the Jewish Federations of North America, and for us to take this out on the road and to have these discussions and to ensure the prosperity of the Jewish people and the continuity of the Jewish people, and as Julie said, the security of the Jewish people. So with that, thank you, all of our panelists. Thank you for being here today, for caring for your work, for your leadership. And Dirk, it is important as we sort of segue over and talk about this important program with the Jewish Futures Pledge to just really connect the dots between how important the communities have benefited from our legacy giving and our donor advised fund. So look forward to continuing that conversation with everybody. Thank you, and turning it over to Dirk Bird and the next group of panelists. Thank you.
David, thank you very much. Mike, Mark, Julie, Lisa, thank you so much for your wisdom, your leadership, your passion, what you've done.
Dirk, I don't know that we can hear you. Dirk, we cannot hear you.
Organizations, all of our partners doing. I want to welcome in our next set of panelists who had an up-close view of just how important plan giving and endowment and long-term resources have been over the last 7.5 months. Never could we have imagined, especially those donors decades ago who created gifts of permanence, who established donor advised funds, how critically important their generosity and those resources would be for us over these last 7 months. I want to welcome in our panel for the next part of this conversation today. Michael Balaban, CEO, Jewish Federation of Broward County. Michael Friedman, Senior Philanthropic and Planning Services Advisor for the Associated. And Laura Linder, President and CEO of Jewish Community Partners. Thank you so much for being with us today and lending your time and your insights into what we've seen over the last several months. As the previous panel discussed, the role of plan giving and endowment hasn't always been given the right kind of prioritization in our communities. I think that we've all somewhat struggled between the balance of plan giving and endowment in our annual campaign. However, over the last 7 months, we've heard over and over again just how important plan giving, donor advised funds, other unrestricted resources have been in leading crisis response. And Michael Balaban, I want to go to you first. And if you'll give us an insight into what you've seen in your community and describe how plan giving helped you lead mobilization efforts in Broward County.
Thank you, Dirk. So plan giving is a critical lifeline for our community. And frankly, not only in crisis, but throughout certainly the last decade. One could say we're fortunate, but with all modesty, we worked very hard to grow multiple streams of revenue with a real emphasis on the growth of our unrestricted endowment. And because of that, that gave us the ability when the coronavirus hit to distribute an additional $2.2 million to address emergency needs. And we were able to do that even prior to going out to donors because we had those resources building up. It also gave us the room to address other emerging issues as they continue to arise throughout this pandemic.
Laura, I want to go to you next. When we spoke earlier a couple of weeks ago in planning for this section, you talked about the role that donor advised funds played in particular. I'm curious what you saw in terms of crisis response and what you heard from fund holders as you went to them in the early days.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dirk. I'm honored to be part of this panel along with my colleagues, Michael and Michael. So yes, donor advised funds have played a very critical role in our ability to respond quickly to the needs that have arisen due to the pandemic. One of the things that we did early on, which actually is something we've been doing for a very long time, is gather a list of needs from our community agencies. You know, one of the critical roles of federations during this crisis has been convening the community to understand needs and coming up with solutions to meet those needs. So as we have been doing, we convene the community, tried to get a handle on the specific needs that had arisen, and we shared that with fund holders. And we've continued to do that every other week or so, sharing what we call a needs list with donor advised fund holders. And I printed a list this morning. Since March, we have facilitated 94 gifts from donor advised funds from that needs list. Things such as PPE, face shields, picnic tables for outdoor learning, tents for high holiday services at our congregations. But the Donor Advised Fund platform gave us the place to present these needs and receive funding that was needed.
Michael Friedman, share with us a little bit about what you've seen in Baltimore. I know that you've spent years in building a culture of long-term philanthropy and engaging fund holders. Tell me what you saw in terms of their response in the early days of the crisis.
Well, in the early days of the crisis, we did something very important, which I think both Michael and Laura have done, which is to send out a communication to all donors who have donor advised funds or supporting foundations, explaining the depth and breadth of the crisis and the need for emergency funds for everything from women who are now living with their abusers, to seniors who were isolated and needed food and needed access to food, to our response to the city of Baltimore and to the inner city through our fresh food programs at the Pearlstone Center and so much more. And they responded beautifully. More than half of the some $2.5 million that we raised back in March, April, and May for COVID response came from donor advised funds and foundations. And in addition to that, an equal amount of money that was directed to the Jewish community was directed to the food bank and to other programs in the city and in the county, in the general community, because we are a caring people after all. We too, like Laura, send out periodically funding opportunity lists. We actually do it twice a year, around Passover, when people are going to be, please God, someday again with their families in a Passover Seder, and around Thanksgiving, when we, please God, someday will be with our families again Thanksgiving, so that people can have a conversation around some very small but important needs in the community. And this year, this time, for this Thanksgiving, most of those needs will specifically focus on COVID-related needs. That's an opportunity for people to come together as a family and have a discussion about, it's a way to teach philanthropy to your children and grandchildren, to prepare them. And I want to thank the panel before for putting a spotlight on the work that we do. It's very, very important. I've been working in the trenches for 30 years doing this. And it's so, so important for families to have these conversations about what's important to them and to listen to the next generation about what's important to them as well.
So Michael, I want to stay with you for a second, because these dollars don't appear overnight. You've been working, as you mentioned, for decades in the trenches, working with donors. How have you approached plan giving and endowment, long-term philanthropy, and building a culture in Baltimore? What are the core components of doing that so that we can ensure that the next generation has access to a vibrant, diverse Jewish life?
So I think the first building block is the donor advised fund. It's that toe in the water for people to start a fund that begins to help them manage their giving, start to think about what's important to them. And then over time, we have donor advised funds that are 40 plus years old now, where the intergenerational succession, if it hasn't already happened, is about to happen. So I'm having as many conversations with people about what happens after 120 years with your fund as I am having conversations with other people about starting a new fund. And these conversations go in two important directions. One is, what legacy do you want to leave behind to the community? And the other is, how do you want to empower the next generation through your fund or another fund to be philanthropic and to care for the needs of the Jewish community. So the fact that we now have the Jewish Future Pledge is sort of giving voice to that very conversation is a beautiful thing. It gives us a way of branding it, if you will. I can tell you, though, that from commitment, which is not legally binding, to the legal documents that then are necessary to actually record what the matriarch and patriarch want done with the money can be an arduous and sometimes contentious process. But we do our very best to make sure that we can do both, so we can see to the future of the community and also make Jewish philanthropists out of our children and grandchildren.
Yeah, we're prepared to have those challenging conversations oftentimes, but it's all worth it at the end of the day if we can leverage what we've built over the course of time, build on the success of other national legacy giving initiatives such as Loge 25, Create a Jewish Legacy, and of course the great work of the Harold Grinspoon Foundation through their Life and Legacy program, and now the Jewish Future Pledge. So we have all of these frameworks within which we can engage donors and their families. Michael Balaban, I want to go back to you for just a second. When we talked a couple of weeks ago in planning for the session, we talked about where the annual campaign fits within the context of modern progressive approaches to philanthropy in our communities. And I loved how you framed the annual campaign. Could you share with us a little bit about the viewpoint that you've taken in Broward County to build on all forms of philanthropy?
And I'll go back to your earlier question on building a culture of planned giving in a community. And for us, it goes entirely to our mission. And while our purpose may be to care for the needs of the Jewish people and work to build a vibrant Jewish future, our mission is to increase philanthropy to invest in Jewish life. And that pairs in nicely with the pledge that we discussed just before that. As an organization, we run an integrated total FRD shop. So, and in the past, I think so many federations were solely focused on the singular product of the annual campaign. And it's an important product, but like a restaurant, show me the restaurant that just serves one dish, and I'll show you a restaurant that goes out of business. So we provide multiple opportunities for our customers to engage with us. And that includes multiple revenue opportunities. And we look at the annual campaign as our on-ramp. And for some, that's what they're going to engage in throughout their whole life. And that's only what they're going to engage in. And that's great. But for others, that's going to bring them on to a whole list of other conversations around planned giving in their life. And that can include supplemental gifts to foster increases, corporate giving to build on their community position, and then planned gifts to secure legacies for future generations. So that's really been our motivation around that. And it starts at the top, whether it's with the CEO, and in the case of Broward as the CEO here, and my board chair, we both have legacies. So we participate fully in these streams because we know we've got to model that leadership for our entire donor pool.
So part of that role modeling piece is a critical aspect of building that culture. And I know Mike Levin mentioned that in the earlier part of our conversation about taking steps forward to say this is important. Laura, I want to turn to you and tell us a little bit about how you raised the profile of planned giving in your community. What were those cultural pieces that you inherited, and how has that evolved over the course of time?
Thank you, Dirk. In Memphis, our structure is a little different because we started with an independent Jewish community foundation, which was a separate and continues to be a separate organization from our federation. So in the early days of the foundation, was just celebrated its 25th anniversary, we really focused on, as Michael Friedman mentioned, we started with donor advised funds and worked up from there, and really made philanthropy part and plan giving part of the philanthropic culture of our Jewish community, working very closely with our agencies, providing training, even prior to our participation in the Life and Legacy program of the Harold Grinspoon Foundation. You know, we were engaging agency leadership in taking a look at their long-term donors and helping them strategize on reaching out to their donors for legacy gifts, and a very robust communication strategy, sharing testimonials and storytelling about donors who had stepped forward and created meaningful legacies, working with professional advisors, making sure that they understood the resources that the Jewish Foundation could provide to them and to their clients. So I think it's been in, you know, slow, steady, constant activity focusing on building a legacy culture. And when our federation and foundation created an operating consolidation 5 years ago, we integrated, probably not to the extent that Michael Balaban has an integrated you know, solicitation strategy, but we integrated the annual campaign with legacy at the top level of the campaign, really focusing on those top 150 donors and looking at them much more holistically, as opposed to just honing in on their annual gifts. And
Laura,
slowly,
how did you build that culture among your lay leaders? As we saw in the previous example with the Jewish Future Pledge, you had lay leaders invest of themselves after there was an awareness of how critical this work is. What was the process that you used there to get your lay leadership on board with internalizing the importance of doing the plan giving and endowment work?
So, I mean, that is the mission of the Jewish Foundation. And for 25 years, there's been a group of lay leadership representing every agency of our community, plus general community members, whose sole focus was to promote long-term sustainability of Jewish life and through plan giving vehicles. So that it has been a 25-year cultivation of leadership and donors focused on long-term sustainability, which happens through legacy gifts.
And
let me make one other comment. And
yes.
I'm sorry, because I loved hearing about the Jewish Futures Pledge. And my colleagues have already said this, but it is now providing another tool for us to use to have those legacy conversations. And let's face it, for all of us that are out there and have been doing this, we need those tools. And so I made a list during the call of the tools that we have used here that have enabled us to build that culture, both with leadership and with donors. 2164 training, Lion of Judah endowment, the Jewish Future Pledge, the Create Your Jewish Legacy that was launched in San Diego 15 years ago, it may even be longer than that, and then picked up by the Harold Grinspoon Foundation as Life and Legacy. Those have all been tools that have helped us in our communities create that legacy culture. And I'm excited to think about how we can now use the Jewish Future Pledge.
Well, I appreciate your capturing the list, and it's good to know that you were taking notes. So that's good role modeling for others who are on this panel. Michael Balaban, I want to go back to you for just a second. In thinking through ongoing crisis response, because we're not done with this. There are waves still yet to come. What role do you see a diverse approach to philanthropy playing, and how are you thinking through the next wave of crisis response in aggregating and distributing resources where it's needed most in the community?
That's a great question. It's I think all of us in our organizations have realized that we've got to really be a little bit of everything in order to address the needs. So whether it's from a community engagement perspective, in gathering, to funder. And I'll give you a positive that's been an outgrowth of the crisis. Because of the work that we've done through some of the tools such as Life and Legacy, we've worked so closely with synagogues and agencies to help build their endowments. They've come to us around this crisis, and we've been able to start to address what are the different needs that are taking place out there, and how do we begin to work together to tackle those issues. I believe that's gonna, and I hope that's gonna be a lasting effect, that we work stronger and closer together in really trying to come to a new understanding of what the ecosystem needs to be from a service delivery perspective, as well as from a funder perspective. And we're spending a lot of time creating new partnerships between agencies and donors, investors, and we're really working with our fund holders on much more of an investor model versus a client bank model, working with them to understand what are the current needs and what do we view the future needs, what they're going to be, and how they can invest in making sure that the tools and the infrastructure is there to carry an organization forward out of this or through this if it continues.
And I think that's an important point, taking a partnership approach with our donors and our funders, taking a proactive approach, the philanthropic advisory, and letting them know our thinking. Because oftentimes we're shy to communicate how we're thinking through challenges with our donors, but engaging them as thought partners will only deepen that relationship.
And we
Michael
do it
Freeman,
a little bit differently.
Please.
So we don't produce a list of needs in the same shape or form. I guess we do it a little bit internally, but we run a model here called Senior Philanthropic Advisors. So there's a team of our professionals that are assigned to a group of donors and prospects. So in addition to regular meetings with our top donors and our community members that typically I lead, or we bring someone in, and David Brown's been involved in those, Eric Fingerhut's been involved in those, as have you. But on a regular basis, our professionals are out there introducing issues, items, and needs to specific individuals in the community. And we vet that through what they're funding in their donor advised funds, what we know about their overall interests. We sometimes bring them together as groups and hold those conversations. But even though we have this requirement for social distancing, we've made sure that our communication has become much more tighter and concise, one-to-one with individuals.
I appreciate your sharing that additional thought in terms of how you're communicating and how you're thinking through the communication with your funding partners. Michael Freeman, a similar question. You and I spoke a couple of weeks ago about how this crisis response is different than what we experienced in 08 and 09. How are you thinking through the next wave of response, and how is that informing your engagement of fund holders in Baltimore?
So thank you, Dirk. You know, we did talk about this. I believe that this recovery, the recovery from what we're experiencing now, is going to be much longer than the recovery from 08, 09. By March of 2009, the market started taking off, and it didn't stop for years and years. And it only affected, frankly, a small segment of the community, to be perfectly honest. This pandemic is affecting everyone. It is a threat to the survival of everyone, and it's a threat to the survival of our community. But it's also, we've known about the threats to the survival of the Jewish community, the spiritual survival of the Jewish community for forever, as far as diaspora Jewry is concerned. I think that we're going to have to, in speaking to our donor advised fund donors and our foundations, to not talk just in terms about taking care of the crisis, which is our focus right now and which must be done in order to, among other things, access every single dollar that's been put out by JF&A. Thank you very much, in matching dollars to those 11, I believe, foundations that have put up the money for the match. But beyond that, we're going to have to think in terms of not days, months, but years of additional funds to rebuild, reorganize, restructure, rethink everything that we do, and to make sure that we have the resources available to meet those future needs, whatever they're going to be. The story that we're telling today in October is different than the story we were telling in March, April, and May, and yet it's the same pandemic. It's just moving so quickly, you cannot possibly anticipate everything is going to happen, but we can all see it changing every day in front of our eyes, and we know that we're going to have to respond, and it's not just now. So we have to be able to have the conversations with our donors to plan for multi-year commitments, not just one-year commitments, as well as then, that's why unrestricted legacies are so important. Yesterday, we heard about how many major philanthropists are now throwing unrestricted money at organizations that they care about. Not that they don't care about the causes, but they understand that those organizations just have to stay in business. Our agencies, our synagogues, our day schools just have to stay in business right now to continue their work. And so unrestricted money for them today is so important. And the legacies that we get from people that they may plan today and we may not see for another 30 years are going to be so important to us then as the unrestricted money is now, as Michael Balaban was talking about earlier, to meet these increased needs so that we can access them just like that. I just wanted to say one more thing very quickly. Yesterday, there was a comment made, why do we have to have endowments? Questioning sort of, why don't we just access these billions of dollars in foundations and endowments and donor advised funds? It's there, we have very real needs today. Why don't we just take it all, or a very, very significant portion of that, and spend it today to get over the hump, so to speak? And I think that, that while I appreciate that, we have to also understand that our endowments, our foundations, our donor advised funds have been the engine that fuels innovation, that allows us to move past a crisis and to build a community to meet whatever needs are going to be before us. We recently, not that recently, but a few years ago, we got an unrestricted legacy of a couple $1 million. And the will was so interesting to read. The will was written in 1936. And the will actually made reference literally to the winds of war that were blowing in Europe and the concern about refugees and bringing them here or getting them to it wasn't Israel, but to Palestine. It was this vision that the legator had for the future. And it's just so incredible. The federation of next year is going to be different than the federation of today. Our values will endure, philanthropy will endure, but none of it can happen without these relationships that we have with donors who can and will be responsive, without the legacies that they leave for the future generations, that when important people from around the community get together and together plan about, what are our priorities, what do we need to do, and we have, thank God, the resources here to do it.
Beautifully said. I don't know what you're going to do when I come to you for final comments, but that was really well done. So thank you for sharing that. Laura,
that was the final comment. No.
Laura, I want to go back to you for just a second. How are you having these layered conversation and with donors and balancing somewhat of the dynamic tension that exists between the need to raise above and beyond resources in crisis response and raise resources that we need to raise every year just to maintain the infrastructure of our Jewish communities through the annual campaign? Tell me a little bit about how you're balancing that in Memphis.
So, look, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't challenging. We have immediate needs, we have long-term needs, we have really long-term needs. How do we, as you said, balance all of that? One of the strategies that we have undertaken for the 2021 campaign, I know this isn't necessarily a campaign conversation, but I will share it, is getting a multi-year commitment from all of our major donors. We launched a 3-year campaign. Asked everybody who gives $5,000 or more to make a 3-year commitment. Now that's manageable in a community of our size. We have 150 donors that fall into that category. And I'm pleased to share that 96 of those donors have made a 3-year commitment, which, one of the priorities that we set very early on in this crisis is that we wanted to be able to provide stable funding to our agency partners. And one of the best ways that we know how to do that is through the annual campaign and the support that we're providing them every year. So we went for that 3-year commitment. But simultaneous to that, and I think something that due to the crisis, we have a much higher awareness of the need, we are having legacy conversations. We're in the midst of an endowment campaign for what I would argue to be the most critical agency in our community, which is Jewish Family Service. There has never been a time where that agency has been needed more, at least in recent memory. So raising endowment gifts has been part of our conversations over the last few months as well. And that's going well. And then the last piece is legacy giving. I recently reached out to a handful of our estate attorneys and I said, how's business? And their response has been, we've never been busier. So what that tells us is, in addition to donors being aware of current needs, they're also doing a lot of self-reflection. We're living in a pandemic. Life will never be the same. Have I taken care of my family and have I taken care of my community? So we're seeing an acceleration of activity really in all 3 of the levels that I just described: annual giving, contributions to endowments, and in creating legacy plans. And I think right now, I see an increased awareness of the importance of federation and what we're doing. We've never been more important to our community, and our donors recognize that.
And I want to thank you for bringing up this factor that we're seeing with estate planning attorneys being incredibly busy and our donors being aware of what's critically important to them. And I think that there's a baseline level of vulnerability that we're hearing, and not in terms of risk, but vulnerability in terms of a willingness and a desire to engage in something beyond a transactional conversation. Something that speaks to their values and their influences and leaving a legacy for the future of the Jewish community. Michael Balvin, similar question that I asked Laura, how are you balancing the need to raise additional resources to respond to crisis waves, as well as make sure that your core infrastructure for the community, your core grant making, remains strong?
Yeah, and again, we run slightly a different kind of operation because I'd love to say fully integrated, but we certainly have moved towards total FRD, or total financial resource development, in a much more robust way than I think many organizations have been able to just yet. And I'll give it to you in context. Our annual campaign is $4.5 million. We will distribute close to $22 million this year through all of our revenue streams. And our unrestricted endowment, and Michael spoke about the importance of unrestricted. Our unrestricted endowment is nearing $100 million. So with our assets on the unrestricted side, we can surpass in any given year what we're raising typically on the annual campaign side. So, but how we go about it, especially during this time, and I don't mean to be crass with this statement, but don't let a good pandemic go to waste. People are open to the conversation. They understand the necessity. They understand the challenges that individuals are having and the challenges that organizations, whether it be a Jewish Family Services, a Jewish Community Center, a senior program, or our synagogues from the spiritual side, the challenges that they're facing in addressing the needs of the vulnerable in our community, as well as even the non-vulnerable, people who are just feeling isolated and alone. And that creates another set of risk. So because this is front and center in every news station, newspaper, and unfortunately most of the dialogues that are taking place in a given day, it opens us up for very transparent conversations with individuals about the need to secure today. It used to be a conversation around, will you fund this or that? Now it's a conversation of funding this and that. And just because someone may say, I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation, we don't take that ever as a no. We just take it as a not now and a desire to further educate them down the road. And we look at this as a ladder for a person's engagement in their philanthropy through the community. And that concept has spilled over to, so our communal partners often turn to me and others in the organization, and I turn to them when we know that they're going to have the better case for soliciting an individual for that legacy gift or for that annual gift. We're doing a lot more joint solicitations to really elevate the conversation and raise the tide for all ships here, as opposed to looking at a singular institution, because I think we're all committed to a long-term, lifelong infrastructure of the Jewish community that's going to prosper and be vibrant.
Thank you, Michael. Going back to our first part of our session today and talking about the Jewish future and the concept of the Jewish Future Pledge and the demographics that we're all aware of and the transfer of wealth. You all have been doing this for years, and you've built infrastructure and you've built cultures and you've invested countless hours in making legacy giving a priority. For some of our communities, they're still struggling with that dynamic tension between annual campaign or other forms of philanthropy. And it's an either or proposition. Mm-hmm. Given the need to have these conversations over the course of the next 5, 10, 15 years, as the wealth transfer continues, as our aging donor base continues to move on, where do you recommend communities who are just beginning this process start? And Michael Balaban, I want to stay with you. What piece of advice do you have for communities who are just now exploring making this a higher priority?
Well, so Broward County, Florida, for those of you who don't know where it is, think Fort Lauderdale. 20 years ago, we were a community of 250,000 Jews. We've lost 100,000, predominantly due to death, passing away. Now, we did not have that same culture of integrating annual and endowment. We had only just started that dialogue then. And from those who came before me, I'm so thankful that they opened that window up for us. But we realized we missed out on a huge audience that could have helped secure a future for our community. But I go to the old nursery rhyme, the nursery joke. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I think for many, they think you've got to structure a whole set of processes. Just start the conversation somewhere. We've got a number of incredible tools, whether it's Life and Legacy. We're launching a premium share program where a donor who does an irrevocable insurance policy with us, they pay their first 5 years. We pay the remaining 5 years of that policy. And we're just launching that, and it's meeting with huge success. We run a program called High Care, which is a concierge care management program, which works well for us. And donor advised funds. These are great ways of capturing the client so that you can begin the long-term dialogue of philanthropy. So pick one or pick a couple of these different tools, put it into your toolbox, and just get started with one conversation. And over time, you'll find that one conversation has become 5, and then 20, and then 100. This year, through Life and Legacy, we'll have signed over 320 commitments for the community. And this has been a community-wide effort with incredible partners locally and through the Grinspoon Foundation. But imagine that in 1 year, over 300 commitments coming into the community. That speaks, incredible opportunity for our future.
Great. Thank you. Michael Friedman, same question. What advice do you have?
Yeah, so I think that we are very, very fortunate, not by we, I mean all of us, that we have a reputation for being the greatest fundraisers in the world. We have absolutely a corner on the market in terms of annual unrestricted giving. People who have been giving year after year after year after year. And I'm sure that for most of those years and with most of our donors, those conversations have been more or less on the transactional basis. Hi, I'm calling from the Federation. It's that time of year. Put me down for the same, or I'll give you another 5% or whatever the answer may be. And that's a great conversation to have, because we know they're going to say yes. So let's change the conversation. Let's change the conversation completely. We already know they're going to give. So ask two questions. Two questions. One, what matters to you? And two, how will we be remembered? Now, within each of those questions, there are other questions to be asked. What matters to you? What matters to your family? And what matters to others? Because as a federation, what matters to others is what matters to all of us. What matters to you is how you want to participate in that Jewish future. And what matters to my family is how they will be impacted by seeing what you have done, and how they will be impacted by seeing what you have left to them through a donor advised fund or foundation, if that is your choice, or if you are afraid of what they will do, no matter how much you talk with them, certainly through an endowment and a legacy to the community. How will you be remembered? How will we be remembered? How will we be remembered by our families, by our community, and by the generations that we'll never know? Because I can tell you that the money that we're spending today was given to us by people from generations that we just don't know. We don't know their history anymore. Nobody's alive today who knew who they were personally, but they had the same kinds of hopes and dreams for a Jewish community as we have today. It looks different, but it's Jewish and it's our people, and we will survive thanks to the generation and legacies of those that came before us. But keep it simple. The conversation is really simple. It's about legacies, plain and simple. It's about what you leave behind. How you do it, whether it's insurance or your will or a trust or anything else, that's where the professionals come in. But any annual campaign solicitor can have this conversation. That's what we've learned from Life and Legacy. That's what we're going to learn from the Jewish Future Pledge. Anyone can have this conversation, and we're partners. We, the professionals, are partners with you to help make sure that every single wish comes true.
Thank you. Laura, advice.
Okay, in the 30 seconds that I have left, I'm going to break it down in a much simpler way. And I love what my colleagues said, and I agree 100% with what they said. But I'm going to put on my Fort Wayne, Indiana hat, where I'm from. And what would Fort Wayne do? Because they don't have the resources that I have in Memphis, that Michael Balaban has in Broward, or certainly Michael Friedman has in Baltimore. I would do two things. Start with your board. Have a declaration of commitment form and hand it out at a board meeting. If you're a layperson, you can talk about it. If you're the professional, start simple. All of us together, if we create a legacy for the future of the Jewish people, together we can do it. And the second thing that I'll say is, right now, since we're all on Zoom, there are all these resources at our fingertips. So the excuse that we can't afford to bring in a speaker just doesn't cut it right now, because I know that I or any of my colleagues would be thrilled to spend 45 minutes with any community that would be interested in having us share our experience with their board and get them motivated to make this a priority. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be very simple with a simple declaration of commitment form.
And I can't think of three better people to offer that message to communities that are thinking about taking this on as a priority. It's so critical for our local communities and for our broader Jewish ecosystem that we're all involved in this work together. I want to thank you for sharing your time, sharing your leadership, and for doing the work that you do every day. I want to thank our attendees and our previous panelists for being with us today. As mentioned before, we will send out a recording of our session and links to all of the materials that were referenced earlier today. Enjoy the remainder of GA 2020. Much strength as you continue your critical work, and we look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.